Welcome back to another episode of Hypnagogue. So happy to have you here as always. I am really excited to share this latest chapter with you guys. I want to go ahead and do my first dedication here to my mom, my mama, Mamacita. She is the one you all have to thank for having this audiobook podcast version of the story. She was the one who gave me the idea. And so I know that she's listening. Love you so much, Mom, and I really think you're gonna like today's chapter. So without further ado, here is chapter 3, An Evacuation of Death. Siffra had been out in the horse stables this whole time, sharing a pen with the doctor's workhorse. The horse that arrived with the hypnotist's carriage wasn't like the others that Elufeus kept. He was a ruddy brown creature with a sunken back and empty gaze. She felt pretty bad for him, but was mostly just curious about him. Where had he come from? She'd seen the black, boxy behemoth he'd arrived here pulling. It was louder than any moving thing she'd ever seen. And he was past the point of heavy breathing exhaustion. He was thoughtless, motionless, dead standing up. He must have traveled from far away to be here over those windy, rolling hills. Once, Siffra had lived on those hills. She was still a yearling when her herd found themselves near the lighthouse. Winter came, brutal and piercing, and it was she alone who was either naive enough or brave enough to approach the lighthouse. She lingered just beyond the edge of the property. There was warmth there, and 2 men who whistled while they worked. When Elufeus and I saw her standing on the horizon like a great oak, it took our breath away. Even at her young age, Siffra stood as tall and as strong as the cliffs themselves. Her white coat was flecked with black, and her mane, luscious and dark as night, blew wildly in the wind. Her eyes looked at us from across the distance, observing. As marvelous as she was, we were both in agreement on how to treat a beautiful, wild thing, and so in those first days, the 2 whistling men never approached her. Siffra kept coming back. She never could get anyone to join from the herd. This was the gift of youth. She didn't know just how unfortunate the rest of them had been before her, how many yearlings they'd lost to the bridlemen. She also did not know that each day she went to watch the men at the lighthouse, her herd stood even further back, watching her. For weeks, everyone watched as Elufeus and I did nothing. And then, one night, I came to the stable to find her standing inside. She liked the old man more, but with me she knew she shared something in common. She did not rear when I entered the stable, and was not surprised to see me. And despite all her fear, she knew I would not shut the gate on her, or the door, or use any rope at all. I came in, tended my business, and left without looking at her. She knew I knew she was there, and that was all that needed to happen that night. Elufeus came out the next day, and the 2 were fast friends. He liked to spoil her rotten with whatever sweets we had around the cellar, and as much hay as she liked. He called her the great queen of the knolls, and braided her an increasingly intricate crown of dandelions each spring. Siffra came and went from the stable, often returning to the herd for a few days before returning. We never locked the gate or the door, and only used ropes when Elufeus began riding her. He liked to show her the cliffs, bringing her to the best vistas he knew of, and he liked to ride her hard. It was immediately apparent to us, long before Elufeus ever thought about riding with her, that Siffra was born for it. born to run, born to challenge the very wind that blew wild across the landscape around us. Elufeus made sure she ran. Together, the two of them reigned over the hills, soaring over them like a benevolent eagle king and queen. It was then that he named her Siffra. She recognized the sound when Elufeus spoke, and understood it as the sound he made when he had her in mind, but Siffra didn't entirely get the utility of a name, being as she was a wild creature. Nonetheless, she loved it. Siffra's name reminded her of the sound the winds made when she ran as they rushed past her ears. As Elufeus aged and grew weaker, Siffra was growing stronger and stronger. She was a titan now, nearly 6 feet tall and legs as strong as mountain pines. I began riding her when Elufeus really fell ill, but there was never enough time. I made sure the gates and the door remained open so she could do as she pleased, but she rarely left. She knew that Elufeus was ill, and would remain nearby until that had changed. When the carriage arrived, its horse had been put in her pen with her, and the gate had been closed. It was the first time I had ever closed the gate on Siffra, but I looked her in the eye then with an apology, fed her an apple, and she knew that it was only temporary. She would stand tall and proud and remind this poor fellow what it meant to be alive. She devoted herself to this endeavor, even as the doctor's presence brought with it a palpably foul energy. She was hell-bent on challenging it with her own. She also knew that Elufeus's last days were upon us, and quietly her heart was breaking. She knew now that she would never again see her friend. When the hypnotist doctor left, and Elufeus let out that terrible, rattling breath, I swear she could hear it all the way down from the pen. When I came bursting into the stables, not long at all since I'd been down there seeing off the doctor, that breath was still on her mind. She was surprised to see me again so soon, and even more surprised when I began preparing her for a ride. Her surprise shifted into anger and stubbornness. She stomped one hoof on the ground. It resonated deep and powerful against the earth. She would not leave him. Not now. I was frantic to get out of there, but I had to give Siffra something to help her understand. I stood before her and I looked her in the eyes. This is for him. She remained bolted in place, chin up, looking down at me. I took a deep breath and summoned every bit of humility I had. I bowed my head and spoke this time out loud. Siffra, Elufeus wants nothing more than to die a natural human death. That won't happen if we don't get me as far away from him as possible. Please. She could hear the desperation in my voice. The love, too. She knew how much I loved Elufeus. Siffra snorted and turned so that I could vault myself up onto her back. Then we were off. Even in her grief, Siffra ran faster than most horses ever would in their life. But it wasn't enough. I needed to drum up some resolve for both of us. I knew the best course was the one we were already on, and that if I could just tap into Siffra's most basic nature, I could ride out the fire. I used to watch Elufeus and Siffra from the lighthouse's watchroom. From there, I could watch them for miles. As Siffra ran, every sense of entrapment flew from Elufeus's mind, like loose ledger papers out the window in a storm. When she ran, she didn't just go for the horizon, she pulled it toward her. Elufeus had named her the Great Queen of the Knolls. I had my own name for her, Earth Taker. I knew she had it in her. I urged her on, but Siffra only rushed forward for a moment before returning to a lesser pace. The lighthouse was fully eclipsed by the hills now, and the grass whipped at her feet. We flew past the bent willow crossing where Elufeus and I had first gathered lumber. The lone wire fence we once mistook for a whistler in the dark, the burnt poacher's wagon that lit up the sky like a warning one stormy night, the old cairn of Stone Pile Row, the goat bell tree, the orchard, all of them catapulted behind us. Then, to my dismay, a silhouette appeared just up ahead. It was transparent, and the sky shone through him. It was Elufeus. He was riding Siffra. It was a collision. In the blink of an eye, Siffra halted beneath me, driving the earth beneath her to a riotous halt, neighing like a curse and rearing her front legs against the air in front of us, kicking. She couldn't see Elufeus, but she knew something was there, something unnatural. Siffra's reflection reared against her, but Elufeus stayed firm on his seat. His control was strong and vigorous. The horses were still crying out when Elufeus yelled at me over their screams. "On the stoop of death, and you're still loitering around." Smiles broke out over our faces. I believe it calmed Siffra. They both settled down until they were standing. She was still unnerved, but had gone quiet. "I've been trying," I started, breathing quite heavily, "to get away from you." He looked the two of us up and down, raising an eyebrow. "And you're making poor Siffra do the work for you." I shook my head. "I can't use my tricks," I explained. Death is a rare mystery, he'd told me so many times. I want to see it for myself. If I simply sent myself elsewhere, I might interrupt Elufeus before he was finished dying. Or worse, I could accidentally void his existence entirely. I had to use whatever natural means I had available to me. I told him before that the land around us was part of me, that for me, to walk the earth is to pace the corridors of my mind. He asked me who I was in that case. Clearly, I was not simply the earth itself. I had a mind. I had my own thoughts. I asked him what he thought I was. Days of thinking. "You are the thought of a thought." He looked at me now, more astonished than ever, then shifted his weight atop Siffra and angled away from me. Before he kicked off, he reminded me of one more thing. "You have another mind, Gabriel. Use it." I watched him surge off like a ship catching a gale. Siffra shrieked once more as the ghostly presence pulled away and was gone. I wasted no time spurring her back into motion and steering her into the opposite direction. Soon we were back up to speed, the ground racing beneath us. Elufeus was right. I had a mind entirely of my own, and I needed to use it now. Siffra was holding back now because of her grief, but I could help her. She was a uniquely permeable mind. It's how she knew Elufeus was dying. It's how she knew from the moment she laid eyes on me that there was something we shared, something fundamental. Right now, it was a godsend. I didn't have to force her resolve. I could just feel it myself. I began to sink into myself, deep and slow, like groundwater through bedrock. Trickling water, a bead of water slipping downwards, down a window pane, and beyond are the hills in the rain, weather-beaten and dim. And there she stands where she stands, a willow tree, a canopy, a mane of hair, indifferent, disheveled, long unleashed and vague. You find yourself panting, watching a breath touch the glass, bloom, accumulate, condensate, trickling water, a bead of water, slipping downwards, down a window pane and beyond are the hills in the rain, weather-beaten and dim, and there she stands, a willow tree, a canopy, a mane of hair. Up above, far above, I felt the light, percussive pattering of Siffra, Earth-taker, great queen of the knolls. My body was dissipated now, no longer material, and without the weight of me on her back she was flying, like a stone skittering down a steep incline for miles, accumulating velocity constantly. My body was gone, but she knew I still rode her, and she knew what to do. The distance between us was the earth itself, vast and impenetrably dense, but it reverberated with each step that she took, and that impact sang through the earth like a drum connecting us. I just had to try and stay fixated on the rhythm she was tracing across the plains, but I didn't have to try at anything. She'd kicked into pace, no longer pattering far up on the surface. Siffra was attacking the earth with fiendish precision, impossible dexterity, twisting the world into the most intricate patterns she could get through her feet. Layering, more fixation exposed only more embellishment, more design, more ambition, an avalanche orchestrated down to the pebble. Had my omnipotence bled into her? Gone with grief, gone with allegiance, gone now with man's facsimile of glory. Triumph is an unsatiated appetite, beating at the door, no possessions to speak of, wanting nothing but the heart out of your chest. Up on the surface, Siffra heaved with each stride. She and I had crossed some kind of threshold, and fear, real, irrefutable fear, began rotting the earth I'd become. I no longer knew what was natural. I had no doubt she'd consume the whole earth if I allowed it. What creature had I dug up and unleashed? Deep inside of me, this dismay festered and began propagating like weeds growing as hasteful and tangled as vines. I believe this is what finally miraculously halted the Earth-taker. Only fear. Only the fear of herself. The fear dragged me violently back up through the earth and threw me onto the ground at Siffra's feet. She hung her head, lungs laboring hard to steady her breathing. I looked around us. We were in a lowland area, a shallow basin of soft earth and tall reeds. Siffra's wake was marked in the fields behind her. The path of disheveled mud looked shredded and torn like an open wound. The sun was just beneath the horizon, and the sky was a dim, dusky blue. I knew not which way was east or which way was west. It was either the end of a day or the start. The air moved differently here, slower and more circular, and he was gone. I could feel it now, like the empty hall through a flute. For now the wind blew without noise. It had taken the world, even just for a handful of moments, to evade our love of Elufeus, but we had done it. And he had died the death that he wanted. A tear slipped from my eye, and then another, and then we were defeated, Siffra and I. I walked back on foot with Siffra. We took our time. There wasn't much of a rush now. We wanted only to catch up to the funeral party. A huge crowd had gathered on the beach beneath Elufeus's lighthouse. He had asked to be laid out on a bed of ice so as to prolong his decomposition and to be put on a platform where anyone who wanted to see him could come. And they came. Droves of them. Sailors primarily. Entire fleets of ships were anchored now off the shores, and their crews came to land to see the Sage of Split Rock. But there were also teams of the local fishermen, fellow lighthouse keepers from up and down the coast, goat herders, orchard keepers, and fruit gatherers, carpenters, builds people, stone stackers, and fence layers, herbalists, school children and their teachers, fishmongers, eel sellers, tanners, farriers, blacksmiths, even the undocumented recluses who lived in the shadows of the caves of the cliffs without employment contracts or incomes had come out to witness this extraordinary sight. A corpse. Unable to speak to the corpse, they spoke to his sons. They asked about him and what it was like having a blood father. They proved admirable restraint in asking what it was like the moment he died. They might not have ever seen a man truly die, but they knew grief. Many of the little ones asked their governesses when the baby would get there. "There will not be a baby," they would answer. "For how long?" "Forever. This is called a natural death. The man is passed and he will not come back." "But his body is right there." "Yes, it is dead." "Is that why it's stinky?" "That is why it is stinky." Many of the children were very upset about the stinky corpse. They hated thinking that anything could ever just go completely away. But even a lot of those children were also fascinated by Elufeus. They, more than anyone else, asked if they could touch him. As per Elufeus's requests, they were allowed to. During the days, and especially at night, they played music. Not the music of hypnotists, but real human music, imperfect, often out of tune, slightly offbeat. It was wonderful. Siffra and I had stationed ourselves up on the cliffs where we could watch all of this happen from a distance. On the second day, she walked down to where they were. The sons recognized her as Elufeus's horse. They led everyone in weaving fresh wreaths and crowns for her to wear, and they recalled the stories Elufeus had told on his deathbed about the great queen of the knolls. She would stay with them through the end of the celebration, and then return to those who raised her. Later, she would set off from her herd once more in search of a new adventure. A very wealthy ship merchant who'd met Elufeus 7 years prior had arrived early on and spoken with the sons. She had brought with her a ship. It had belonged to her for decades, one of her personal vessels, moored for years in a quiet inlet she rarely visited. She gave it now to be used for Elufeus's last rites. On the 5th night, when his body was most swollen and malodorous, they prepared the ship and him on it. A small crew sailed it offshore. Once it was beyond the many ships that were anchored in the bay, they poured tar and oil on the planking and laid down dry straw. They set torches to the sails and fled onto a dinghy, which they used to paddle back to shore. It was a wild, rushing blaze, the largest fire many of them would ever see in their whole life. The smoke drifted ashore, and we breathed it for hours into the night as that molten flame lit up the sky. Later, when the burn had died down into a low, dim smolder, many people went to their tents to rest. I laid down on my side, on top of the cliff, and watched the remains of the ship glow like an ember on the horizon. I watched and watched until it died out, until the sun rose, and the people wandered slowly away. The ships took their courses, and Elufeus's sons returned to the keeper's cottage to pack their belongings. They would return to their employers now. A new keeper had already been assigned to the lighthouse and would be there soon. The next morning, I was still laying there on my side, looking at the horizon, when an insurance salesman came walking up from behind. When he spoke, he was breathless. "I must know what made all that smoke." I turned over and looked up at a very tall man with dark black skin and a bald head. Underneath a lanyard strung with a pair of glasses and a VSC badge, he was wearing a gray wool Melton field jacket. It was a 487-year-old heirloom piece of clothing. He and the last 6 of his priors had kept meticulous care of the jacket, and aside from a slight fading of color, it was in excellent condition. The jacket put him in a very thoughtful mood whenever he wore it, which was just about always. Behind him was a rental car. Behind the windshield, a locally hired driver was sitting and waiting for him to return to the car. I dusted myself off and stood up. "A funeral pyre," I answered. Slightly strained in hearing, as many very tall people are, the salesman bent down to hear me. He laughed, thinking I was making a joke. He gestured toward himself. "His," he said by way of introduction. This was an indivic introduction. Pronouns first, names if you get there. In the possessive case, always. I pointed myself in the opposite direction and started walking. "I meant no offense, stranger," he hollered at me as I put distance between us. The salesman was realizing he wasn't going to get to know what all that smoke had been about. He was disappointed. He'd really been curious. Enough to make the rental car driver pull off the main road and drive up towards the strange man laying down by the cliff. Against my own grievances, I was suddenly struck by my own curiosity. I stopped in my tracks, turned about faced, and stormed back towards the salesman, only halting once I was close enough to read his badge again. "You work for the Varick Salvage Company?" I asked. "I do," he said. My mind stirred at this. "What are you doing here?" I asked ardently. We were oceans away from the felled lands. I was bewildered and probably quite threatened by what his presence implied. Elufeus' homeland was as rare as he was. Gravity conditions had remained stable for centuries. There was no risk of landfall here. But the truth came crawling in, itchy, like cheap wool. There was no risk of landfall yet. The insurance salesman was on an early-stage prospecting trip, seeing if any landlords were ready to prepare themselves for the worst. He looked around us as if to gesture. "I'm just minding my job. Do you own any of this land?" "That is not my particular strain of delusion," I answered. The salesman made a friendly smile. "I'd rather not bother us with the lecture, then." I gave him a weird look, then turned and resumed fleeing his presence. What force had roused that mountainous cloud of smoke from the ocean? Who was the short-tempered, glassy-eyed stranger shrinking now towards the edge of the earth? Where was he going? As he watched me walk away, he wondered about all of it. And as I watched myself recede into the horizon, so did I. Thank you for listening to another episode of Hypnagogue. If you're enjoying the story so far, and you want to make sure that you don't miss when new chapters come out, I encourage you to follow me. How you do that is you're just going to click on the title at the top of this page, and then you should see a follow button. And if you click on the little 3 dots to the right of that, you will see an option to rate the show. If you could leave the show a rating, that'll help start growing our little, as I lovingly will be calling you guys, our little Hypna gang. And again, a reminder, if you are interested in reading this story, you can go check it out on my Substack. I will be leaving the link to that in the description below, but if you prefer to just type in a URL, it is laurenswee@substack.com. So that's LAURENSWEETACK.com. Thank you so much for your support, and have a great rest of your day. See you next time.